Gospel, peace be to all. The readings from the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke. Let us attend. The Lord spoke this parable. The land of a rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to myself, so you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you, and the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So is he who lays up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. As he said this, Jesus called out, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Glory to thee, our Lord, glory to thee. Christ is in our midst. One of the fun things I get to do on the altar is listen to the echo, because the speaker downstairs is about 3 seconds behind up here. So I get to listen to glory to thee. Try to be careful because it makes me giggle. So if you see me grinning when I turn around, that's what's going on. It's not you. I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing. So today's gospel and epistle are interesting. They tie together in some nuanced ways. So you remember in the epistle reading, Maria, when she read, it was that Christ has broken down the middle wall of partition, the thing that divided us. And classically, that was often thought about as the partition between the Greeks, the Jews and the Gentiles. That the Jews and the Gentiles didn't really respect each other, didn't like each other. Jews considered the Gentiles dogs, and Gentiles considered the Jews to be just a bunch of superstitious nonsense, and their religion made no sense. And so Jesus, in his coming, united the Jews and the Gentiles, and that's true, he did. But St. John Chrysostom said it's more than that. The wall that he broke down was the wall of commandments and ordinances. It was the law. And the law was meant to fence us in, to protect us. And because we are more like goats than sheep. With sheep, you put them inside a fence, they're happy. With goats, you put them inside a fence and they want out. Doesn't matter what's on the other side of the fence. It could be a parking lot, they want out. They could be in luscious browse, because goats don't graze, they browse. They could be in luscious browse and see a parking lot and jump the fence and stand on the asphalt and be happy. That's human, okay, that's us. We like to jump the fence and stand on the asphalt. Our feet are hot, we're parched, we have nothing to eat, but we're happy because we chose it. Okay, that's us. God gave us the law to protect us, and we decided we didn't like that. We didn't want to be told not to eat that apple, even though we had the whole garden available and only one apple we told we couldn't eat. We had to go eat that apple, that one apple. And so the law became for us then not a protection to draw us near to God, but a source of punishment as we kept running around chasing our own desires. And the law became then, as we saw it, something that punished us for being bad. It was never meant to be that. The law was meant to be something that protected us from that which was bad and drew us near the heart of God. And the Theotokos, whose presentation in the temple we celebrated yesterday and continue to celebrate up until Thanksgiving or thereabouts, was the fullness of Israel's understanding of the true nature of the law. That the law was not meant to punish us for running away from God. The law was meant to draw us near to God. It was meant to teach us the ways of his heart so that we would become one with him. She didn't have the fullness of the divine life yet. That came with her son. That came when Gabriel stood and said, behold, or said, "Blessed are you among women," and she said, "Behold the servant of the Lord, the handmaid of the Lord." That's when the divine life entered her. But up until that point, she lived a life of fullness, of understanding that when God gives us something to do, it's for our good. And we do it not out of a fear of punishment, but out of a desire to draw near to him. Because we love our Father. And if Dad says do this, we do it. Because he loves us. And he wants to take care of us. He wants to give us good stuff. So that's the Theotokos. And Jesus broke down the law as a source of punishment and shed forth the divine light into our hearts and the divine life so that we could walk in the ways of God. So that we would naturally, of our own volition, out of the outworking of our being, draw near to God. Because if the divine life dwells within us, then we are fully what we are meant to be, which is sons and daughters of God. And his life resonates in us. His being flows through us and to others around us. And we receive and give forth the grace of God. And one way we give forth the grace of God is in how we treat others. Now, the gospel story. There's this rich guy. Now, before Jesus told this parable about what's called the rich fool, incidentally, for the record, I never want to be the guy that God looks at and then says, "Fool." Okay? That's a bad thing when God looks at you and says, "Fool." So, just before this parable, a guy had come up to Jesus and said, "Master, teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. He's being greedy. He's not giving me what's mine." And it's true. The other brother was probably supposed to share the inheritance. Dad had died. The two brothers were supposed to split it. And the one brother wasn't giving to the other brother what he should. And Jesus tells this parable about covetousness and about how destructive it is to the soul. And what he talks about is this rich guy. Of course, it's a parable. There wasn't a real rich guy like, but there are rich people like this. There are poor people like this too. His fields brought forth abundant crops. And so he said, "What shall I do? Oh my goodness, I have all this stuff. What am I going to do? I know. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And I'll fill them up. And then I'll say to myself, soul, take your ease. Eat, drink, and be merry." And Jesus said, "You fool, you fool." God said to him in the night, "You fool, this night your soul will be required of you, and where will you go now?" If we don't build up for ourselves riches in heaven, but only have riches on earth, our soul does not go to dwell with God. We become those to whom God says, "You fool." I don't want to be that. How do I not be that? Let's think about this parable a little bit. The land that brought forth the crops. Now, yes, the rich guy had to have the ground tilled and he had to sow the seeds. But ultimately, the produce of the ground ultimately didn't come from him. It came from God. He didn't give thanks to God for what he received. Instead, it was his. It's my thing. And I'm going to take it. You know what? I don't know why the guy didn't just build another barn. He said he had to tear down some perfectly good ones, and just because they weren't big enough, to put his more stuff in. And he filled up his barns. Now, when he went to stand before God, none of what was in those barns went with him. But you know what? He could have, the church fathers are very clear, he could have taken the crops from his field with him. You know what? They say you can't take it with you. They're wrong. You can't. This is how you do it. You take your surplus and you put it in the bellies of poor people. You feed the poor. And then your reward goes before you to heaven. And when you approach God, Jesus looks up and says, "Oh, when I was hungry, you fed me. Welcome. Come into the joy of your Lord." Not, "You fool, you thought it was yours. You kept it for yourself." Now, there's nothing wrong with being rich. This is not a parable about being rich and how bad it is to be rich. I've said this before. That's a logical fallacy called the argumentum ad lazarem. It doesn't work. It doesn't hold water. And as proof, we've got Abraham, the way rich dude, and we've got Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, who were both very wealthy, and none of them were condemned. Because they used the riches for God's purposes. As they saw it, what they had belonged to God, and if God needed it, he could have it. And that was fun. Job learned that the hard way. He got it all taken away. And he had to learn what it's like to have it and not have it, but then he got it again. The blessing of the Lord on Job was not just that he learned that all comes from God, but that he was restored. He got his stuff back. But he had a little different attitude toward it, I think. So this is not about how evil it is to have stuff. This is about how evil it is to treat your stuff like it emanated from you and comes back to you and it's all yours. And to keep our surplus for ourselves instead of putting it in heavenly treasuries. So that when we go to stand before God, it has gone before us and opened the door on our behalf. So that we become like the steward in the parable of the unjust steward. We have used earthly money to secure for ourselves